저는 감기가 있
Hi, everybody. Okay, I am getting things set up here so that we can share screens. And I want to, oh, no, I want to stop that one. Okay, so, all right. So today is Monday, and it's the first meeting of our week, and it's a 2-hour meeting. So we have to get a lot done today because on Friday we have the 1-hour class, and during the 1-hour class we are limited in terms of time, right? So one of the things I want to do at the 1-hour class on Friday is have an in-class debate, and I want to talk a bit about the debate that we're going to have on Friday. The first part of that assignment was described in the syllabus, right? In the syllabus, which if I can find it here, and it's not. Let me see if I can find it again one more time here. So this is the debate sign-up sheet that I have distributed to you through Google Drive. All right? I sent you the link that you can all go in and write your names on this file. So I sent you the file, and let me show you what you have to do. So you have this file that I sent you, and I also sent it to my YouTube, my Yahoo account to show you what you should do here. So if I go to my, let's see, let me, if I can find my Yahoo account. And so just to show you what my Yahoo account looks like. This is the Yahoo account, my Yahoo account. I sent it from my Gmail account, like I sent it to all of you. And I received this link, right? So you click on this link, and it takes you to my Google Drive account, and you'll find this file. And this is where I want you to sign up for debate. And you can see Hyo-ryong Park has already signed up. She wrote her name in under week 10 of Monday, 2nd of December, to debate pro on this topic. To South Koreans, the global rise of social media has significantly increased the impact of human rights issues in shaping US and UK foreign policy. And so what you need to do to put your name in, I all would like you to put your names in here as well by next Monday. Choose where you would like to debate. Is you go to you go to Google Docs, you click on Google Docs, and you'll see this. And everybody in the class can write their name here. So let me just show you. If I write my name here, right, like that, that should, let me see, then I close that. And just to show you, so if I refresh this, you see, well, you should see my name. Let me see if I can do it again here. Yeah, there's my name. See, so you can all do that. You can all do that. Okay, and so please do that. Okay, and pick it. So you have to decide what week you would like to debate, and if you're going to be pro or con on that debate topic. Okay, pro or con on that debate topic, and so you have some time to think about it, and And then everybody will know when everybody else is going to debate. And you're going to prepare to participate in the debate by sending me a 150-word paragraph on this topic, pro or con. And you're going to send it to me as I asked you to send that to me by Wednesday for this week's week 2. Now, nobody signed up, obviously, for week 2 because it's too early, right? It's too early to do that. But let me see if I can go to Cyber Campus here. So stop share and go to share screen. And where's Cyber Campus? And no, I don't see Cyber Campus. So I guess maybe what I have to do is I have to close Cyber Campus, log out, and then log back in. And maybe it'll work this time. And go to US Foreign Policy. And let's see if I can get that up on Zoom here. And go share screen. Cyber Campus, hooray! And there you see the website. So I asked you to submit a 150-word paragraph by Wednesday, 7 o'clock in the morning, so that I have time to look at it on Wednesday and Thursday before class. And on the week 2 topic, and the week 2 topic is like this, share screen, and to South Koreans, the Chinese political system is more effective in responding to globalization than the US political system. So take a position, pro or con, on that, and argue whether or not the Chinese political system is better than the US political system in dealing with globalization. Chinese certainly think so. At least the Chinese authorities. Xi Jinping and the other top leaders believe so, compared to Donald Trump's administration in the United States, right? Compared to how the Chinese have successfully addressed the coronavirus, and the Americans are failing to address it effectively. And the question is very vague and broad. And the plan will be to have an in-class debate. I will randomly assign you to breakout rooms. You know, in Zoom, I can assign you to breakout rooms. You can see down here at the bottom, right? And so some of you, half of you will be pro and half of you will be con. I will assign you randomly, and then we'll have a discussion in our short class on Friday on this. And then we'll vote by poll as to pro or con winning the debate. Who won the debate, pro or con? Okay? But to prepare for the debate, I need you to send me your paragraph, right? Your paragraph by Wednesday. I asked you to send it by email. Let me see, maybe I should just see if I can show you that on Cyber Campus. So we'll go here, and so, yeah, there, right? So send it to me. I think you can submit homework also by Cyber Campus, but I'm not so certain it's as easy as sending it to me as an email attachment. And so please use and cite information from chapter 1 in the textbook to support your argument. So show me the page number, write the page number, where in chapter 1 is the information you are using in your paragraph to support and prove your argument, or to at least support it, okay? And the idea behind having you write the paragraphs is that if you have to write a paragraph in English, you think about the information, you learn the words you need to engage in a discussion, because one of the objectives in this class is to give you public speaking experience in English. And so the key for all success is preparation, right? You prepare, you have to prepare, all right? And this helps you prepare by writing the paragraphs in English to participate and develop your teaching, your speaking skills, your public speaking skills, whether it be through Zoom or face-to-face. Who knows, maybe we'll go back to face-to-face at some point, but we can do it through Zoom, as the whole world is working now through Zoom, if they can. And that is one of the objectives in the class that I highlight, right, is that we want to develop your speaking skills. So, and it says stop. Why is it stopping the share? So I go share screen like this, share, and so you can see, yeah, demonstrate more effective written and oral communication skills for political analysis, and so you know and then now that we know who was in the class, I can keep a record of for participation. And I will upload that record of participation on the cyber campus so you can see, but anonymously. I won't put your name on it, but you can see how you're doing in terms of participation. So if anybody, by the way, has any questions, don't be shy about asking them. You can always ask questions. And so, okay, so that's the plan. And what I want to do now is, anybody have any questions? No questions? Okay. Let's have a poll. Let's do a poll. And let me see what I would need to cover first before we have the poll. And there's a lot of concern in Europe. There's a lot of concern in Europe about what will happen in the upcoming US election. So let me go to Zoom again, 1 second here. So share screen and go to, there we go, and we'll here. Okay, so the Trump administration is a riddle. It's a question. We don't know what it means in terms of its relationship to the rest of the world. This is again from the New York Times. The New York Times notes that if Trump gets reelected, he might destroy NATO or make NATO irrelevant or even leave NATO. Now, keep in mind, what does NATO stand for? North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was created during the Cold War, when, rightly or wrongly, the Americans believed that Moscow, under Joseph Stalin, the Soviet Union, was trying to do what Hitler's Germany failed to do, conquer the world. That the Soviet Union was a Russian version of Nazi Germany. And so the West and the East, America's allies in the West and America's allies in the East, Japan and South Korea, had to contain the Soviet Union. And in Europe, containing the Soviet Union meant creating a defense alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, which was signed during the Korean War, and that's not a coincidence, right? The Americans concluded that that was Stalin's first move to try to take over the world, take South Korea. Tell Kim Il-sung to take South Korea for the communist bloc. So it says here, President Trump is said to have spoken privately for years about withdrawing from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a move that critics say would be a major victory for Russia. But there's a lot in that statement, right? That Russia wants to destroy, that statement assumes that Russia wants to destroy NATO. That Russia It doesn't explain why Russia wants to weaken or destroy NATO. Does Russia want to weaken or destroy NATO because Russia wants to dominate Germany and France and Italy and the rest of Western Europe? Or does Russia want to destroy NATO because it thinks NATO wants to destroy Russia, or at least Putin's regime, Vladimir Putin's government in Russia? There's no discussion of that in this article. There's no answer to that question. Why does Russia want to defeat NATO? Does Russia want to defeat NATO because Russia wants to dominate Europe? Or does Russia want to defeat NATO because Russia thinks that NATO wants to defeat Russia? NATO wants to dominate Russia. No discussion of that question. And there's usually no discussion of that question ever in the New York Times or in other sources, other media outlets. And I tell you this because this is one of the issues I am working on in my own work in political science. What was the Cold War? The dominant view in Washington, not the only view, but the dominant view in Washington is that the United States did save the world from a Russian version of Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union. And I think that's wrong. I think the Soviet Union was defensively motivated. It thought the West, including the United States and NATO, wanted to destroy the Soviet Union. That's why the Soviet Union was belligerent and aggressive, and invaded Afghanistan, for example, in 1979 when I was a senior in high school. They invaded Afghanistan not to move to take the oil of the West in the Middle East as the first step to take the oil, but because they thought the West and China were attempting to instigate Islam, political Islam in Afghanistan, to make entry into the Soviet Union that has tens of millions of Muslims living there in order to destroy the Soviet Union. But my view is minority view. But you see it, as I told you, the New York Times is the most authoritative source, the most important news source in the United States. Not because it's the most popular, but because all other news sources respond to what the New York Times covers. If the New York Times has a story on an issue, CNN will have a story on it, or Fox News will have a story on it, because the New York Times started it. So to go on here, for nearly 4 years, President Trump has publicly railed against the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, angrily demanding that its members pay more for Europe's collective defense. In private, Mr. Trump has gone further, speaking repeatedly about withdrawing altogether from the 71-year-old military alliance, according to those familiar with the conversations. Again, the assumption here is that this is a good institution, this military alliance, that this is a good thing, that this is good. It's good. Why is it good? Because it saved the world from a Russian version of Nazi Germany. That's why it's good. And Trump wants to destroy it. Oh my gosh. But that assumes that the Cold War was a war that was fought as in a cold manner, indirectly, an indirect war, because we have nuclear weapons. They fight World War III, it's the end of the world with nuclear weapons, that the Soviet Union was trying to conquer Europe. That's the assumption. You see that again and again and again and again and again and again in the American media. In a second term, he may get his chance. Or was the Soviet Union belligerent and nasty because it was scared? It was scared of the West, like the West was scared of Russia. Recent accounts by former senior national security officials in the Trump administration have contributed to a growing unease on Capitol Hill and across Europe. They lend credence to a scenario in which Mr. Trump, emboldened by re-election and potentially surrounded by an inexperienced second-term national security team, could finally move to undermine and even end the United States NATO membership. So in the textbook, they're going to talk about in different chapters the US presidency, the Congress, the national security bureaucracies. It mentions here the national security team, the national security bureaucracies. These all emerged during the Cold War and became big and huge organizations during the Cold War, and they still exist. I told you, under Trump, the defense budget of the United States government has increased 20%, not gone down, it's gone up 20%. Even though the Cold War has been over for 30 years because the Soviet Union's gone. Keep in mind, Russia's economy is about the size of South Korea's economy or Italy's economy. Is this country really trying to dominate Western Europe? Its whole economy is the size of Italy's economy. How's it going to dominate Western Europe? It's got lots of nuclear weapons, but I told you, Germany could make nuclear weapons tomorrow if it wanted to. France already has them. Recent accounts, okay, I already mentioned this. These former officials warned that such a move would be one of the biggest global strategic shifts in generations and a major victory for President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia. Like, that's bad. Why is it bad? Again, the assumption here is that Putin wants to dominate or at least be a dominant actor in Europe. That's the assumption. Again, and this is the best news source in America, at least in the corporate media, in the corporate for-profit media business. Although Mr. Trump has been known to have expressed interest in withdrawing the United States from the Atlantic Alliance since 2018, new evidence of his thinking has emerged in the run-up to the November election. In a book published this week, Michael S. Schmidt, a New York Times reporter, wrote that Mr. Trump's former chief of staff, John F. Kelly, a retired four-star Marine general, told others that one of the most difficult tasks he faced with Trump was trying to stop him from pulling out of NATO. One person who has heard Mr. Kelly speak in private settings confirmed that he had made such remarks. On Wednesday last week, Mr. Trump spoke in North Carolina, one of the states of the United States, at an event commemorating the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, a conflict from whose ashes the alliance was formed to protect Western Europe from the Soviet Union. Again, that the Soviet Union was trying to dominate and control Western Europe the way Hitler's Germany tried to dominate and control the world and Europe and the world. Was that true? Is that true? Remember, a country can be belligerent and militaristic and violent because it's afraid. It can be militaristic and violent because it's aggressive, like Hitler's Germany, or it can be militaristic and violent, like the United States was during the Cold War, and participated in wars in Korea and Vietnam that killed millions of people, literally millions of people. But made no mention of a continuing American security relationship with the continent. For the past several months, the security establishments in Washington, you're going to read about security establishments in the book, right? The bureaucracy, the national security bureaucracy. And that involves hundreds of thousands, even millions of people, if you include the soldiers, the Department of Defense, United States. And these people vote in elections. They pay attention to politics. And they include the corporations that supply the weapons and guns to America's military. Big part of the US economy. For the past several months, the security establishments in Washington and Europe have briefly exhaled, concluding that Trump is unlikely to challenge the alliance's core tenets before the end of this term. But as the election approaches, experts say anxiety is growing. It's a real risk, said Thomas Wright, the director of the Center of the United States and Europe at the Brookings Institution, a think tank in Washington. We know from Kelly and Bolton that he wanted to go much further in the first term. If he feels that he has been totally vindicated in the election and he feels that people have endorsed his policies, I think he could effectively withdraw from NATO. I mean, we have a few French students and maybe a Belgian student in the class, right? How do you feel about that? Would you be happy, French and Belgian students, if America left NATO? Is America a problem? Is Russia more of a problem than America? Congress would most likely move to block any effort by Mr. Trump to exit the alliance altogether, but experts say he could deal a near lethal blow in other ways. One would be to undermine a provision in the original treaty, the NATO Treaty, Article 5, that calls for collective self-defense. Previous presidents have interpreted it as a promise to defend any member from military attacks, but Trump has questioned. So Article 5 of the NATO Treaty says that any attack against Germany or France or Italy would be considered an attack against all the member states of NATO. So an attack on one is an attack on all. And they would all come to the defense of that country that was attacked. Remember, this is during the Cold War. He could just reinterpret it. Maybe all he would do was just send a strongly worded letter. If Putin, for example, attacked Estonia, let's say he decided Estonia should be back in with Russia, or damaged Estonia is part of NATO. So is Lithuania, Latvia, former republics of the Soviet Union. They're part of NATO now. What if Putin says that they should be he tries to undermine or destroy their democratic governments in order to make them part of the Russian sphere of influence? That's the concern, right? That somehow that Russia wants to rebuild the old Soviet Union somehow. It lost it and it wants it back. It wants Ukraine, it wants Belarus, it wants Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, it wants to control Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, the countries that were formed out of the old Soviet Union. Jorge Benitez, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council think tank in Washington, noted the Trump administration announced plans in July 12,000 to withdraw 12,000 troops from Germany, the strategic heart of the alliance, and sought to cut funding for the Pentagon's European Defense Initiative, a program whose funding the administration initially called for increasing and pointed to as evidence of the president's support for the alliance. European officials, Mr. Bennett said, see the escalation of negative steps, and they are definitely concerned that the negative pattern could continue if Trump is reelected. Remember, if Trump is reelected, he doesn't have to worry about getting reelected again. Trump will be unleashed. On Capitol Hill, where the Congress is located, the US Congress, Democrats focused on security issues and say a re-elected Mr. Trump could permanently reshape the relationship between the United States and Europe, which has been defined for generations by Washington's bipartisan role as a leader and protector of the continent. Protector of the continent from Moscow. European diplomats are exceedingly cautious when speaking of the subject, fearful of provoking Mr. Trump. One ambassador from a NATO nation declined to comment on a hypothetical situation, but people who have spoken to these senior diplomats say a Trump victory will create a new sense of emergency across Europe. The US president has grown increasingly confident in his own command of national security, and where he once surrounded himself with strong-willed establishment figures to help him navigate war and diplomacy, he now relies more on less experienced advisors who are less inclined to challenge him. He's the president, right? He's not Jesus Christ. He's not God, right? So he's still got to deal with people that work for him. You know, it's a political problem if you have to fight with your Secretary of Defense or your Secretary of State, America's Foreign Minister, or America's Minister of Defense. If you got to fight with those people, you're the president, you got problems. You have political problems. But he's pushed those people aside. Gone are seasoned officials with a strong loyalty to the alliance and the transatlantic relationship, including Mr. Kelly, Jim Mattis, another retired four-star Marine general, and Mr. Trump's first defense secretary, H.R. McMaster, a retired three-star Army general, and Mr. Trump's former national security advisor. They're all gone. Their successors are not thought to be acting as strong checks on Mr. Trump's instincts. The president even jokingly referred recently to his current Secretary of Defense, Defense Secretary, Mark T. Esper, as Jesper. Get it? Esper, yes, ne in Korean. Jesper, yes, Mr. President, yes, Mr. President, yes. Ha ha! Mr. Esper doesn't stand up to Donald Trump. He says yes to whatever Donald Trump wants. So that even Donald Trump makes fun of him. Jesper. an iconoclast in many ways. Mr. Bolton, he was a national security advisor and he quit because he was upset by Donald Trump and Donald Trump's plans. Okay? Mr. Bolton is a believer John Bolton is a believer in the Atlantic Alliance and has said he was appalled by Mr. Trump's talk of leaving it. In his book, Mr. Bolton recalled how the president, just before a 2018 visit to NATO headquarters in Brussels, dictated remarks saying that we will walk out of the pact, out of NATO, and not defend those who have failed to meet their spending commitments on defense expenditures, right? Mr. Bolton said he was prepared to resign if Mr. Trump delivered the remarks. He and other officials talked the president out of it, but he eventually quit anyway. Since then, Mr. Trump has settled for haranguing alliance members to meet their collective pledge to spend at least 2% of their gross domestic product on the military, on the military, something only the United States and 8 other members now do. Belgium, do you do it? France, do you do it? I don't know, I'd have to check. Because we have some French and at least one Belgian student. So Mr. Trump has hinted in the past that he might not come to the defense of countries that are not meeting the alliance's target of spending on defense. Constance Stelzenmüller, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution who specializes in relations with Germany, said Mr. Trump could simply make the US policy blowing a hole in the alliance's collective ethos. I mean, he doesn't have to leave NATO. He doesn't, the United States doesn't have to formally leave NATO. Trump could just say that he's not going to enforce it. So my question to you is, if Trump stays in power for another 4-year term, will NATO become irrelevant in international relations? So let's go back to the poll. And like that. So if Trump stays in power for another 4-year term, will NATO become irrelevant in international relations? Launch poll. So vote. Very unlikely, unlikely, neutral, likely, very likely. Four more. 3 more. Three more, 2 more. 1 more. One more. Okay, we're all done. So end poll and share results. So likely. You know, there's a lot of assumptions that go into how you answer that question. 1 person, 2 people said unlikely or very unlikely. If you're going to argue unlikely, it implies that you think that all of those powerful economic and political vested interests in NATO, in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in the United States, in the American military establishment, the Army, Air Force, and Navy, in the National Security Council, in the CIA, all of those vast national security organizations that emerged, well, during World War II and then kind of almost disappeared, but then grew up during the Cold War, right? That they're going to stop Trump. Even if Trump wants to leave, Trump will be stopped. Politically, he'll be stopped inside the United States by the opposition. Those of you who say likely are arguing or assuming that if he gets reelected, that it's an indicator that he can overcome all of those vast organizations that involve millions of people who vote in elections, who have their careers and their paycheck, you know, their money, where they get their money from and their job tied up with the American national security establishment, that he's going to overcome them. Or he's going to circumvent them. I mean, I already told you, since Trump, even though Trump doesn't like NATO and he likes Putin, although he still has the government still has conflicts with Russia, the US defense budget is now 20% higher. Why? Maybe the bigger problem is China. Maybe Trump wants to shift to opposing China and wants Russia to become a friend and ally of NATO and the United States against China. That's what some people argue. The United States is pushing Russia and China closer and closer together. It's pushing China closer and closer together. And that's bad. What's the need for it? We don't worry about Russia trying to conquer Europe anymore. Russia's not even communist anymore. Russia has problems with political Islamists in its southern border area. Well, America has problems with political Islam as well, because political Islam threatens Israel and America's friends in Saudi Arabia and in the other oil sheikdoms. They've got a common enemy, the Islamists. I mean, Trump probably, at least Trump's supporters probably have an argument that why are we in conflict with Russia? Well, they might say because Russia wants to dominate Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine. Well, maybe, but maybe not. I mean, Russia, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania are part of the European Union. Russia opposes the European Union because they think it's the nice side of NATO, right? That NATO is one side of this coin, and the other side of the coin is the happy face European Union. But that's because United States and European Union are too closely focused still on the old policy of containment of Russia. Why do we worry about containing Russia anymore? Some people might say, well, Russia's so corrupt. I mean, it's it's the most corrupt place in the world. It's a mafia state run by corrupt people who kill their opponents, their political opposition. We don't want to be friends with that country. Well, possibly. I mean, but America's friends with a lot of unpleasant countries. Saudi Arabia doesn't have a great human rights record, and they're a close ally of the United States. It's incredibly corrupt, Saudi Arabia. So, and until the coronavirus, Trump privately was speaking in good terms with Xi Jinping. He wanted to change the trade relationship, but he was focusing on getting reelected because a lot of workers in America think they lost their jobs because of Chinese imports from China. So it's not clear. I mean, we have to be clear about what our assumptions are in our our understanding. But in the American media is never clear. They just assume that Russia is an aggressive power, that Russia wants to expand its influence, and because Russia apparently wants to take back control over the area that used to be the Soviet Union, including Ukraine, Belarus, and the former Soviet republics. So those are the kind of issues that we are confronting in our class this week. And throughout the semester. Yeah, the world, I should look at the note. Let's look at the notes, right? Because this is our 2-hour class, so we have to make sure we get to the notes. And so let me open up the notes and go back to Zoom. So I have to share screen, and here are the notes, so share. Okay, so Hook, Professor Hook, the professor who wrote this book, this textbook, notes that America has expanded greatly to dominate world affairs, international relations, since the Second World War. And what is the source of this American political influence around the world? What is the source of the drivers behind American foreign policy? One is this notion that somehow America has a mission to stand up and defend freedom. I'm not saying it does stand up and defend freedom, but Americans, like all countries, they like to have a positive self-image. And Americans like to believe that America is all about democracy. That's being challenged by Donald Trump, but this notion of America being an exceptional country that has to save the world from terrible threats, whether it be Nazism, communism, and now supposedly political Islam, is the new threat that America is supposed to stand up against. And now there's talk about China and the Communist Party of China being a threat. American attraction around the world includes supposedly its democratic political system, in which its political institutions diffuse power. The Congress, Capitol Hill, is not controlled by the US president, the way the Parliament in Britain is controlled by the Prime Minister. It doesn't work that way in the United States because the Constitution diffuses power. We already covered lots of this, I think, in the previous week. America is a country which emphasizes, or believes that it emphasizes, small government and civil society in the form of churches and non-governmental organizations are important. And this is supposedly something that much of the rest of the world finds attractive. Heck, look here in Korea, right? 1/3 of the population in Korea is Christian. 10% are Catholics, and the Catholic religion came from, well, originally came from Beijing. Koreans converted to Catholicism when they encountered Catholic religion in China, in Beijing, in the Chinese emperor's court, and they brought it back to Korea at the end of the 18th century. And then the French missionaries came and established the first diocese, the first Catholic Church administrative organization, even before Catholic religion became legal in Chosun, Korea. But 25%, at least 25% of the population Korean are Protestants, Protestant religion, Protestant Christians. And that came predominantly through the Americans towards the end of the 19th century. American missionaries came when American Navy forced the Chosun Korea to open up to trade and business with the United States. And Chosun Korea was also looking for counterbalance against Russia and Japan, and a combination of force and interest, they opened up Korea to missionaries who brought Protestant religion to Korea. So 25% of the population of Korea are Protestant Christians. And some of the more famous ones include Ri Syngman, or Syngman Rhee, who was the first leader of South Korea. A student of Woodrow Wilson, supposedly. When President Woodrow Wilson was a professor at Princeton University, Syngman Rhee was one of his PhD students. Christians took a lead in the Korean independence movement in the early part of the 20th century, disproportionately represented in the Korean independence movement, even though they're only 1%, not even 1% of the population at the time. Americans promote capitalism and free markets, and people like to make money. These non-governmental organizations, including churches, human rights organizations, they have a big influence over US foreign policy, particularly under Donald Trump. Donald Trump's base of support, major base of support in America, are evangelical Christians. And evangelical Christians, America is the biggest source of evangelical missionaries around the world. Who's the second biggest source of evangelical missionaries after the United States and sending missionaries around the world? Anybody want to guess? Anybody want to guess? Korea. Korea. They're the second biggest source of missionaries after the United States around the world. And they have a lot of influence on American foreign policy. So Donald Trump doesn't want U.S. aid in Africa going to non-governmental organizations in Africa or American non-governmental organizations active in Africa that include providing abortion services, because evangelical churches in America often oppose abortion and family planning. Other organizations that shaping U.S. government behavior are multinational organizations, corporations, right? Oil companies, but not just oil companies. Ethnic and religious groups are part of these non-governmental organizations that lobby and pressure the U.S. government. You can't understand U.S. policy towards the Middle East unless you understand the Israel lobby in the United States. And again, Donald Trump is desperately trying to get American Jews to shift towards supporting the Republican Party and Donald Trump away from their traditional support for the Democratic Party by being so supportive of Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government in Israel. Will it work? Donald Trump is behind in the polls, but he was behind 4 years ago too. At this thing, about the same as he was under Hillary Clinton 4 years ago, and he came back and won. Freedom of media and freedom of the press. WikiLeaks publishes secret documents and files that are published, and that has an impact on world public opinion and domestic public opinion and on U.S. foreign policy. We already talked about how, for example, the Islamic State and opponents to U.S. foreign policy use the internet, which was really promoted and developed under the U.S. The neoliberalism promoting free trade and free finance and free trade led to the financial collapse in 2008 and helped strengthen China's role in the world, because China played a critical role 12 years ago in saving the world from another Great Depression. We had the Great Recession, but it did not become a Great Depression, partly because of China's powerful role in that regard, in using its command of its economy to stimulate its economy. So, will the U.S. continue as the world's foremost world power despite itself? Okay. So that was the preface to the book. We have a few more minutes before we take a 10-minute break here. So let's move into chapter 1. United States has been the world's predominant power until recently. United States enjoyed wide respect and security through its victories in 2 world wars, World War I and World War II. And again, victory in the Cold War. What does that mean? Again, this prevailing view that the Soviet Union was expansionist and imperialist, and the Americans stopped it. Now, we're going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about that because I think it's really important. I don't think the Soviet Union acted like a Russian version of Nazi Germany. They didn't act like Nazi Germany. I mean, for example, some of you may have heard this in other classes. Soviet Union conquered Austria. You know, Hitler was from Austria originally. Adolf Hitler was born in Germany, in Austria. the Soviet army, when in making its way to conquer Germany, Hitler's Germany conquered Austria. The Soviet Union left Austria at the end of the 1940s. If the Soviet Union was really a Russian version of Nazi Germany, why did it give up a country that it conquered? You ask, Americans never ask these questions. They never ask these questions. There's all this negative evidence. For example, in 1953, the United States, through Operation Ajax, put a CIA spy, a CIA agent, in power in Iran on the border with the Soviet Union. Had 2,000-kilometer-long border with the Soviet Union. What did the Russian version of Nazi Germany do when the United States CIA put a spy in power on a country right on the border with the Soviet Union? It didn't do anything. There's all this negative evidence that indicates to me that the Soviet Union was a sluggish, slow power that was, when it was belligerent because it was afraid of America the way America was afraid of the Soviet Union. It misperceived America as an imperialist power, an aggressive imperialist power, like the way the Americans misperceived the Soviet Union as aggressive and imperialist power. But that, you don't see that here. You see, this is what you always encounter in the United States, that it was victorious in the Cold War. In other words, it saved the world from an enemy. And that's still dominant today. NATO's good. If Trump will take the United States out of NATO, that'll be a victory for Vladimir Putin. What does that mean, a victory for Vladimir Putin? What does that assume? It assumes that Russia wants again to become a superpower, at least equal to China and the United States. Okay, anybody have any questions? I'm doing a lot of talking here. I'm trying to figure out how to be more interactive, because so I do polls and things like that. But it's taking a little time to get used to this. So how about we take a 10-minute break so you can get a cup of coffee or go to the bathroom, whatever you have to do, and then we restart the class at 11:02. Okay? Okay, so I'll show a video here, and while we take a 10-minute break, unofficial break, while you do what you need to do, okay? See if I can find the video that I wanted to show you. Did I close that already? Maybe I did. I think I did. Yeah, I did. This is a really right-wing institution in the United States, the Hoover Institution. It's good, but it's really Republican right-wing organization.
Firing Line with William F. Buckley, Jr. Tonight's guest, Professor Hans Morgenthau of the University of Chicago. Our topic, LBJ and the Intellectuals. And now, Mr. Buckley.
Hans Morgenthau is a professor of political science at the University of Chicago, which is just the beginning of his academic genealogy. He was born in Germany and took a law degree at the University of Frankfurt. He taught law, but began to slide over towards political science. So by the time he emigrated to America in 1957, he was ready to teach law and political science, and for that matter, history, which he has done at practically every major university in the country, as also at the Armed Forces Staff College, the Air, Army, Naval, National War Colleges, etc. He was also a consultant at the Department of State towards the late Truman years, and then at the Department of Defense toward the late Johnson years. His books are Legion, Learned, and Trenchant. On top of all that he does, he does a great deal of journalism. He has all along opposed the war in Vietnam, which struck some of his followers as unexpected, since he has over the years taken a generally hard position, at least on theoretical questions involving disputes between the West and the communist parties. But although we must undoubtedly get into the Vietnam thing, we're here primarily to discuss the intellectuals and LBJ. Mr. Morgenthau has written about LBJ that he suffers mostly from believing contradictory things at one and the same time. Could you give us an example, Mr. Morgenthau?
Well, the position which the president has taken toward Vietnam perhaps illustrates that point. I think the major problem which we are facing is that the administration has not been able to make up its mind about what it wants. Does it want a self-determination for South Vietnam at the risk of a communist takeover? Or does it want to stop communism at any price, even at the price of self-determination? You can't have it both ways. And I think the administration has not decided within its own mind what its objective in Vietnam actually is.
Now, in what sense has this antagonized the intellectuals?
Well, it has antagonized the intellectuals in that sense that it has confused them, and it has confused the people at large. In the widespread anxiety and malaise which exists in this country at present, I think is in good measure attributable to this lack of clarity as to what we are after in Vietnam. The Second World War was a clear-cut proposition insofar as its objectives were concerned. And so was the Korean War. But what do we want in Vietnam? What does
Broad
victory
charges, I'm sorry, sir. Broad charges have been staked out. You'll see how they're substantiated in just a moment.
You seem to be saying, Dr. Morgenthau, that it is distinctively a matter that irritates intellectuals when people move paradoxically or make their aims unclear. And yet, in point of fact, isn't the ambiguity of our position in Vietnam something that distresses non-intellectuals as much as intellectuals? After all, we have seen Johnson's popularity slide from 65% to 43%. Surely all the people affected haven't been intellectuals.
Surely not. I mean, I'm not suggesting that only intellectuals are perpetrated. As I just said, there is a malaise in the country at large. But of course, intellectuals who are supposed to think rationally and logically are particularly perturbed by this kind of confusion when it comes to a basic issue of national policy.
Well, how then do you account for the enthusiasm of the intellectuals for Mr. Kennedy, when in fact it could be demonstrated that his own rhetoric and actions were at least as schizophrenic as Lyndon Johnson?
It's a very good question. I addressed myself to that question, I think, in 61, because Mr. Kennedy appealed by his own personality to the intellectuals. The intellectuals had been in the wilderness for at least 8 years. And all of a sudden, here comes Mr. Kennedy, Harvard educated, surrounded by members of the faculty at Harvard. There were a few from Yale in order to satisfy you, but very few, so you were not very much satisfied. And of course, many intellectuals, not myself included, thought this was a golden Augustine age for the intellectuals.
You're saying it was purely a tonal, that is to say, that it was just the fact of his hospitality to intellectuals that made the thing believable? Or are you saying all of a sudden that during the Kennedy years, they were willing to suspend those critical judgments which now they make so harshly at the expense of Mr. Johnson.
Well, you see, in the 18th century, we would have called the White House a court. And Kennedy had his court, as Mr. Johnson has his court. And the court of Mr. Kennedy was primarily peopled by artists, intellectuals, classy people.
And politicians.
And politicians, of course, goes without saying. But the tone was quite different from the tone of any court which had ever existed in the White House before, perhaps, except perhaps the very early period of American history, when statesmen and intellectual were one and the same thing. If you take a man like Hamilton or Jefferson or John Adams,
Yes.
I mean, where you didn't have this dichotomy between the intellectual and the politician we have now. After all, the framers of the Constitution, the people who wrote the Federalist Papers were intellectuals of a very, very high order. At the same time, they were practical statesmen.
Well, the reason I'm a little bit confused at this point is because you seem to be saying that those intellectual instincts which go to make Lyndon Johnson uncongenial to the intellectual community, however, didn't operate to make Kennedy uncongenial, perhaps because of the long thirst resulting in the preceding 8 years. Now, then let me ask you this question. When, if ever, will the intellectual community go back and look at the years 1960 to 1963 and thresh them through those critical regimes which have resulted in slightly adverse judgments concerning Mr. Johnson? Is that a psychological problem?
So it is, I don't think so much a psychological problem, it's a political problem.
Why?
Because there is another Kennedy in the wings who one day might become president.
Are you saying
And for whom the same intellectuals wait, you see. And so by glorifying the years from 61 to 63, they are preparing politically the apotheosis of the next Kennedy.
the resumption of the dynasty?
Surely.
Well, do I understand you to be saying that Mr. Robert Kennedy has in effect immobilized the entire intellectual community?
No, well, one cannot speak of the entire intellectual community, of course. And many intellectuals have joined the Johnson administration. And many more remain silent. I mean, what you have is a great silence in the intellectual community. People who will tell me in private what they think, or will write me a letter, but we will never go on record in public.
What are they afraid of? What happens to an intellectual who criticizes
Okay.
Kennedy?
So this is William F. Buckley, and William F. Buckley is maybe the most influential public intellectual in post-war United States. He was the editor of the National Review magazine. He was the intellectual godfather of Ronald Reagan and the neoconservatives who came to power after Ronald Reagan and that dominated the George W. Bush administration after the September 11, 2001 attacks. He really believed that the Soviet Union was a Russian version of Nazi Germany. This man, Hans Morgenthau, is a professor who is the most influential political scientist in international relations theory since World War II. He's been dead since 1980, but he is one of the founders of the theoretical perspective on international relations called the School of Realism. The School of Realism. This man, Buckley, believed that the Soviet Union was the problem. That the Soviet Union was a Russian version of Nazi Germany, and the Americans were having trouble in Vietnam and trying to understand why. This person, Hans Morgenthau, believed that both the United States and the Soviet Union were tending towards being aggressive and imperialist. All countries tend to be aggressive and imperialist. It doesn't matter if they're communist, monarchist, Democrat, totalitarian, socialist. It doesn't matter. all countries strive to increase their influence and control in the world if they can. And, but they can try too hard. They can overextend. They can overextend and spend too much resources beyond what their country, beyond what the power capabilities that their countries have. And they overextend and create a disaster. He argued the United States was overextended in Vietnam. The United States was overextended in Vietnam, and the United States was setting itself up for disaster. And of course, they're talking about the Vietnam War, which is going badly at this point. Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, that's the president of the United States, was committing more and more US forces to Vietnam, and America would eventually lose that war. Someone like Morgenthau would argue that Vietnam should be assumed to belong to maybe China's sphere of influence, that America was pushing Vietnam into Soviet alliance by not exercising an intelligent, wise foreign policy that recognized that certain countries, small countries, belong to the sphere influence of bigger countries, and that sure, China and Russia are both communists, but they're communists. They're both communists, but that doesn't mean that they're part of one big communist empire. But America was pushing Vietnam and pushing the communist countries together into a solid bloc against America by not exercising a wise policy of trying to balance China against Russia. He would view Kissinger and Nixon's later policies as being good in terms of trying to divide China from the Soviet Union, in dealing with the challenge that America faced in Asia. He would view that as a positive policy. This person, William F. Buckley, viewed people like Kissinger, Henry Kissinger, as a problem because they were willing to negotiate with Moscow. They were willing to negotiate and compromise with Beijing and with Moscow. When he thought that communism was inherently as evil as Nazism in Germany under Hitler. You can't negotiate with Nazi Germany. You can't negotiate with the Soviet Union, with communist Moscow. And so we'll come back and talk about these two perspectives, but this person is the most influential political scientist in international relations, and he is a founder, as I said, of the international relations school called Realism. And one of his many books that I can highlight here, it's still in print, called Politics Among Nations. Just to show it to you here, and this is the book. This is the short book. I don't like the short book so much because it's been edited and revised by his students. And his students, Morgenthau's students, are not as bright as he is. It's better to look at the early editions that Morgenthau produced before he died in 1980. We don't have a copy of it here, of the original copies of this book here. Yeah, this is one of the big copies. Morgenthau was not liked by the neoconservatives that dominated the George W. Bush administration, because the neoconservatives like Daniel Pearlman and William Crystal and the others, they think America should expand and intervene everywhere to expand democracy and freedom. And he would say, no, you shouldn't do that. You can't do that. But of course, people can get foolish and believe that they can do that, and they get arrogant and they overextend, and they end up creating disasters for themselves and for the rest of the world. So let's go back to the notes, and I think you can still see that. It says you are screen sharing. You can still see those notes, right? Again, the book notes that when it was published that Donald Trump had talked about America first, rejecting globalization. Donald Trump rejected the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. It was supposed to be an agreement that was going to expand free trade further with Europe and also with Asia. He rejected the Paris Climate Agreement, and he advocated building a wall on the border with Mexico. Neoconservatives don't really know what to make about Donald Trump. I mean, as I said, he claims that he rejects intervening in countries and trying to promote democracy and freedom, but he's not reducing America's military expenditures. And we might, if he gets reelected, he might act in ways that the neoconservatives would find unpleasant. But I don't think he has a strategy. His strategy, I think, is focused on America being a dominant country against potential threats, and that means China and Iran, the Middle East countries. Yeah, America looks really powerful compared to the rest of the world. You see here the global power index as it exists today, and you can see some projections that predict that China will pass the United States by the middle of the 21st century. But these are projections. The rapid changes taking place overseas seem to be beyond the capability of the United States federal government to address because it is decentralized, largely unchanged after 2 centuries. So again, the coronavirus pandemic has seemed to illustrate that at least the Chinese are claiming that their system has dealt with this problem better than the American system. I mean, the virus is completely under control, pretty much completely under control in China. The Americans are still struggling. The textbook focuses on the institutions of power both inside and outside the United States. The US institutions of power include public and private actors, including corporations and non-governmental organizations, civil society. These institutions of power have certain norms and codes and values of conduct, supposedly including a concern with human rights, for example. Donald Trump has challenged this, but just challenged it so far. The US institutions of power have become more complex. The range of US foreign policy is widening. The separation between domestic and foreign policy has become less clear because of globalization, because of the interconnection between international and domestic economics. What the role of the US is in the world is a topic of dispute and argument. Most Americans don't focus that much or care that much about foreign policy. In 1999, when this is, 7 years after the Cold War ended, when the Soviet Union disappeared. When asked in U.S. public opinion survey what was the biggest foreign policy problem confronting the U.S., the most common response from American people in the public opinion survey was they don't know. The Americans have a divided system, diffuse system of power. There were U.S. intelligence organizations warning about attacks from Osama bin Laden in the United States. The U.S. intelligence services warned U.S. Headquarters that on August 6, 2001, that Osama bin Laden was aiming to attack the U.S., but it didn't reach the top levels of the U.S. government because of the conflicting signals and interests of different organizations. It didn't reach the top levels. There were people in the Federal Bureau of Investigation warning the U.S. government that Islamist terrorists were planning an attack. The response was to place all of these organizations to try to centralize them after the September 2011 attacks under the new Department of Homeland Security. And what we have seen in the last few weeks or few months is that Donald Trump has used the centralization of these intelligence and security organizations to defend the homeland that have become more centralized under his power and authority to send police and militarized police to American cities where there are riots and protests against police brutality. That Donald Trump is moving to control the police units and organizations under the Department of Homeland Security, make them look more like military, militarize them, and use them as police forces against other Americans. I mean, I told you, I think, and I wasn't being flippant, I mean, I think Donald Trump is a fascist. He doesn't have an ideology, he doesn't have a program, but I don't think Mussolini did really either, or Hitler did either. They had their objectives. Donald Trump doesn't want to, well, I mean, I think he is an authoritarian populist. He likes power. He likes American predominance. This is a really dangerous situation we're in right now. Do you understand that? I mean, I think that's the point I'm trying to make here. The outcome of the US presidential election is critical for the well-being, not only of the United States, but of the entire world. The next 6 weeks, 7 weeks. If he is reelected, domestic trends and his own predispositions will move more in a direction that makes America look more and more like a fascist actor in international relations, more comparable to Italy and Germany in the 1930s. Of course, there's a difference. We have nuclear weapons, right? Nuclear weapons and international trade and commerce make a big difference, but nuclear weapons in particular. So the Americans won't, just like the Soviet Union during the Cold War, they won't act like quote unquote gangsters in a hurry, the way the Germans were described under Hitler. Right? They're not going to invade other countries because a nuclear conflict could escalate out of control by accident easily in such situations. But they will probably compete for influence in the Middle East and in Africa and in Asia and in Asia through competitive interference in these countries, allying with different ethnic groups and minorities that are unhappy being dominated and controlled by other ethnic groups within that same country. It'll be different than the 1930s because of the danger of nuclear war. Okay, some basic numbers. Okay, the US has 5% of the world's population, but it produces 22% of the world's total economic output. US predominance in military affairs is even greater. The US is the only state that divides the world into regional military commands. So there's a central command for Central Asia, there's a Latin American command, there's a North American command. So there's the US divides the whole world into regional military commands, as if the US military has a global mission. In 2018, the US spent $610 billion on its military. That is 1/3 of the world total. It's just US military expenditures under Trump. The US sells 34% of the world's total arms sales. It's just the United States in a highly competitive business. The US provides more than 100 countries with military training and education for their military. So all of these military programs strengthen the United States. Yet, according to people like Joseph Nye, soft power is another source of American military dominance in the world. That the US is attractive. The attraction of the US government makes the US more influential, is significantly important. Supposedly more influential, America has more soft power than, say, China does. Because China is authoritarian one-party dictatorship. Other reasons why America has soft power predominance, the top 10 universities in the US in the world are located in the United States, supposedly. American popular culture is appealing. I mean, American music, American clothes, American films. Can you imagine, Chinese pop music becoming, everybody does rap. There are Chinese rappers, Korean rappers. That's American cultural influence. American technological success is appealing. The United States is often regarded as an idea rather than an ordinary nation state traditionally defined by physical boundaries, common ethnic or religious identities, and material interests. It gives the US soft power appeal to those outside the US receptive to this belief. Well, again, this romantic appeal of American soft power didn't work in Vietnam, and it doesn't work in some other places in the Middle East. Partly because America was in opposition to Vietnamese national self-determination. Now, of course, Vietnam's got bigger problems. Vietnam has a traditional adversary in the form of China. Even though they're both ruled by communist parties, China and Vietnam are hostile to each other. But, during the Cold War, the dominant view in the US was they didn't see that as being significant. Today they do. A global benign hegemon supposedly is the role played in the United States. The United States is supposedly made possible increasingly free trade on a global level. America did that because it wanted the world to be able to be prosperous and hostile and resistant to Soviet communism. America didn't do it just because it wanted to be nice and helpful. It saw a threat from the Soviet Union, and so the Americans wanted Europe and Asia to develop under capitalism in order to oppose Soviet communism. Top 10 universities supposedly in the world are the United States. I don't know how that's measured in terms of what, publications and research. Imperial overstretch. That's what somebody like Hans Morgenthau would be concerned about. A hegemon may fall into the trap of imperial overstretch, meaning that it attempts to control too much territory because of too much resistance, requiring more military and economic military resources to defeat the resistance. Otherwise, lesser powers spend their resources on economic development rather than on military. They spend their resources on technological development and increase their economic growth relative to the hegemon. Eventually, an ambitious, faster growing, lesser power will challenge the hegemon. It can lead to wars which might reorganize and restructure the international system. Supposedly that was the story of the rise and fall of Rome, the Netherlands, Ottoman, Spain, Britain, and Russia. Is this what's going on with China? China doesn't spend that nearly as high a percentage on its military as does the United States. Is this happening now with China? With China rising, with a US that's overstretched? This was a big topic in political science back in the 1980s when I was in graduate school. US domestic successes through its history has been widely admired. Some US foreign policy actions have generated resentment and anger, sure. In the Latin America, in the Middle East. At times, the US has been quite ruthless, quite vicious. US had slavery. US eliminated the indigenous population as a genocidal policy in its growth and expansion in North America. The US annexed half of Mexico in the 1840s, has repeatedly intervened in Latin America, which explains hostility to America in much of Latin America. US intervened to overthrow the democratic government in Guatemala in 1954 that started a civil war that killed hundreds of thousands of people there in Guatemala. And in Chile, overthrew the democratically elected government of Salvador Allende in 1973 because he was a socialist. Allende wanted to bring about a socialist revolution in Chile. So Kissinger and Nixon used the CIA to overthrow him, and he killed himself in his palace, and the military took power and tortured and killed thousands of people in Chile. Chile economically developed and became the most prosperous country in Latin America under the military dictatorship, but at the cost of democracy. The US supported, again, in the American view, anybody who was talking about socialism was an agent, intentional or unintentional agent of Moscow, because Moscow was using these fools or these evil agents, or maybe just simple fools, to spread its own dominance to try to conquer the world for Moscow in the name of communism. So the US supported cooperative anti-communist dictators during the Cold War, like Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines, Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire, Park Chung-hee in South Korea. I'm not saying the US put him in power, but they supported him, obviously. US allied with Saddam Hussein after Iraq attacked Iran, and Saddam's regime used chemical weapons against Iranian forces and rebelling Iraqi minority groups. So the Cold War was beginning to fall apart at this point, and the Iranian revolution overthrew that American CIA spy, the Shah of Iran, that CIA agent. And the view of the Islamic Republic regime authorities, Ayatollah Khomeini and others in Iran, was to the Soviet Union and the United States to go jump in a lake, a pox on both your houses. The Islamic regime hated both communism and the Americans. And so they attacked Iraq. Well, Iraq attacked Iran because Saddam Hussein thought Iran was weak under the revolution, during the revolution in Iran, And he was going to mobilize the Arabs against the Persian Iranians by getting them excited about attacking the traditional enemy. So he attacked Iran, and he thought the Iranian regime would collapse. And it didn't. It counterattacked and was going to destroy Saddam Hussein's regime. And so the Americans and the Soviets wanted to stop political Islam, so they both became de facto allies of Saddam Hussein in Iraq to support the Iraqi regime in its war against Iran, because they didn't want Iran to win. Oh my God, so complicated. Even though Saddam Hussein was one of the most brutal dictatorships in the world, people used to call Saddam Hussein the Pol Pot of the Middle East, because they didn't want Iran to win. Iran was going to destroy Saddam's regime and then sweep throughout the Middle East and drive Israel into the sea. That was Ayatollah Khomeini's plan. And then, Israel would use nuclear weapons in such a situation. U.S. committed catastrophe in Southeast Asia. U.S. talks about human rights, but the U.S. can be hypocritical. George Bush's war on terror led to publicized abuse of prisoners. U.S. doesn't work to save the suffering of poor people in particular from climate change, even though the U.S. claims to support development and human dignity for all. The U.S. doesn't want to restrict climate change gas emissions, greenhouse gas emissions under the Bush administration and now under the Trump administration. If Biden gets elected, they'll move more in the direction, it will be a repeat of the Obama administration. If Biden is elected, it'll become a repeat of the Obama administration. In 1978-79, the Islamic Revolution in Iran was a response to the US and UK Operation Ajax to install the Shah in power in Iran, instituted a brutal totalitarian regime. Brutal totalitarian regime, and supported it into the late 1970s. US supported the Somoza family dictatorship in Nicaragua that was overthrown by Daniel Ortega and the Sandinista regime in the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. The US has supported the repressive, brutal, archaic, corrupt, incredibly corrupt regime in Saudi Arabia that even, looking the other way, when Saudi Arabia killed a journalist, a Saudi journalist based in America, not an American citizen, but I think he had a green card in America. He had the legal right to live and work in America. And when he went to the Saudi, he was a dissident, Khashoggi. He was a journalist who wrote for the Washington Post. And he went to the Saudi embassy in Istanbul in Turkey to get a document so he could get divorced from his first wife in order to marry a fiancée. And because he wrote articles in the Washington Post criticizing Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince in Saudi Arabia, he went to the embassy in Istanbul and he was kidnapped and he was killed and dismembered. His body torn apart to hide it. And the Trump administration has done nothing to punish Saudi Arabia for that. They instead want to sell more weapons to Saudi Arabia because it's opposed to Iran. And it's not much of it wants to cooperate with Israel. They're not Arab nationalists. They talk like Arab nationalists, but they're more concerned about making money and staying in power in their feudal, medieval, conservative regime. The Trump administration doesn't appear to have any kind of coherent strategy or plan beyond showing that Donald Trump is making America appear to be respected and feared around the world, in the view of the American public, by making other actors in the world submit to American demands. I mean, I told you, it's more of a fascist, it's moving in a fascist direction, the American regime. I mean, remember, for example, when Mussolini came to power in Italy in the 1920s, that regime wasn't the same as what it would be when World War II started in 1939. It evolved and developed. US regime is evolving and developing as well under Trump. So a great power competition between US and Russia and China has revived. So the world has become more focused on making alliances. I think that, I mean, there is some sympathy with US concern that Russia is being pushed into the arms of China by being too hostile to Russia's demands that it should be dominant in the former Soviet Union. I mean, maybe not retake those countries, but it should be the dominant actor there, the way America is a dominant actor in Mexico or in Central America. Russia wants to be dominant actor, the #1 voice for the international voice in Kazakhstan or those countries. But there is opposition to that view in NATO and European Union. Globalization has changed the world, right? If you want to develop your country has to engage in trade, international capitalism. The Soviet communist model didn't really work very well. And so globalization continues to be important. If the world sees a division into blocks between one bloc led by the United States, another bloc led by China, another bloc led maybe by Russia, still there's going to be trade and commerce within those blocks. That's why this focus on technology and the development, for example, of a vaccine is another reason why that's important. Which country has the best model for capitalist development, for rapid development of the country, of your country? If you are a poor country, should you follow the American model or should you follow the Chinese model to develop? And if you follow the American model, you become closer to the United States. If you follow the Chinese model, you become closer to China. We're seeing, for example, that Indonesia and the Philippines are working more closely with China to develop this new coronavirus vaccine. Remember, competition is not so much focused on military capabilities so much anymore because of the threat of nuclear war. But this globalization of international trade and commerce, that is a product of the United States. The US became a primary promoter of that in the 20th century. The US promoted this laissez-faire position that freedom, free trade and commerce was desirable. Is Trump going to undermine that? Does he want to undermine that? It will become more clear after this election what the US will do. China now is talking, at least the rhetoric coming out of Beijing, that it's more supportive of globalization than the US is, at least in terms of the words coming out of the government headquarters. Critiques of globalization. It's led to greater overall wealth, but also to increasing income differences within countries and among countries. And that is part of the reason why Trump has come to power, right? That those of you taking my class, you're able to work in English, you're multilingual, you're young, you're smart. Globalization is great for you, right? It's great for the more educated, but what about those older people, those people who are not so bright, those people who are not so educated, those people who see more and more of globalization, including migration of people coming to live and work in these countries, in the United States or Britain or in Korea. I mean, there's in the last 20 years, at least 1 million people have moved to South Korea from the rest of the world to take jobs in South Korea. And you might, if you're one of these traditional populations in America, you see these people and you feel threatened. Particularly when you see those people doing well. I mean, people that migrate to other countries, they tend to be ambitious. They tend to be active. They tend to be successful. More successful than those people who take for granted what they have. I speak from my own background. I mean, you know, my father was an immigrant who came to the United States from Italy, and he came to the U.S. because he was poor. He came from a poor family. And anxiety characterizes migrants, right? You're in a foreign country, you've got to be successful. All my father did was work, 7 days a week. So what else? We want to make sure we go through these notes. The U.S. national style has shaped U.S. approach to international relations. It's coming from its own traditions and experiences. America's traditions and experiences shape how America deals with the rest of the world. America became a world power at the end of World War II and during the Cold War without having much knowledge of the rest of the world, compared to, say, Britain or France. So when the United States decided that, oh my God, the Soviet Union, it's trying to take over the world. Well, it wants to expand into Iran. Oh my gosh, the Soviet Union might try to take over Iran. Oh, the Soviet Union might try to take over Turkey. Oh my gosh, we don't know anything about Iran. We don't know anything. Who knows? The British know. So the Americans often relied upon the British to tell them what they should do. Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys in Iran? And often that served British interests because the British dominated Iran in the Middle East after World War II. And when Britain became too weak to defend its interests there, it persuaded the Americans to step in while claiming that those actors who threatened, like the British oil industry in Iran, that those people are communists. America should oppose them. That's what the British told the Americans in Iran, that Mohammad Mossadegh, the nationalist liberal democratic leader in Iran, was a danger sympathetic to the expansion of socialism in the Middle East because he nationalized the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which was Britain's oil company controlling the Iranian oil resources. 90% of the British Navy's oil came from Iran. And when Mossadegh nationalized the British oil industry in Iran, this infuriated the British. And the British told us, he's a communist. And the Americans went, oh no. America claimed it was opposed to colonialism. Remember, America was the first country to fight an anti-colonial war to break away from the British Empire. So America is officially against imperialism. So that's important, but that means the Americans, when they want to control a country, they typically try to do it behind the scenes. Like, they didn't create a imperial governor the way the Japanese dominated Korea, right? They tended to work covertly and behind the scenes. So did the Soviet Union in different places, partly because of nationalism, right? With the rise of nationalism in these countries, they're more and more hostile to outside control. So you can reduce the resistance to outside control if you hide it by working through the Saudi royal family or the Shah of Iran and his royal family. Officially, the Iranians are still in control. Officially, the Saudi royal family is in control. But basically, the CIA calls the shots in Saudi Arabia. The US doesn't have the experience of being dominated and controlled by outside powers the way, of course, the Koreans have such an experience. The US did not have a feudal class system that dominated the entire political system the way there was one, say, in Vietnam or in Korea. And that this feudal class often collaborated with the Japanese, for example. When the Japanese first moved into Korea, they found collaborators. When the British moved into Iran, they found aristocratic feudal collaborators. The Americans don't have that experience with a feudal class that they were striving to overthrow. They never had to overthrow their own feudal landowning class the way the Koreans did or the Vietnamese did. And those Vietnamese landowners would collaborate with the French. And so the Americans ended up working with those feudal aristocrats who were collaborating with the French because they thought anybody who was a socialist who wanted to take away the feudal aristocrats' land and give it to the peasants, they must be socialists working for Moscow. Ah! The Americans tend to be monolithic in their thinking. Well, tend to be less, let's say, less diverse in their thinking. Alexis de Tocqueville was one of the great observers of American politics. He was a Frenchman, and he toured the US in the first half of the 19th century, I should say. And he commented about America is really diverse with people from all over the world, but they all have the same ideas about what's right and wrong and what's a good political system and a bad political system, and about laissez-faire economics is good, and you should have democracy and elections. All Americans tend to view politics and economics the same way. And so Americans tended to view themselves as having a superior ideology. But that's true for all imperialist powers. The Germans thought they had the answers. The Soviets thought they had the best answers for the world's problems. Hitler thought he had the best answers for the world's problems. But Americans think that they have the answers for the world's problems, at least until Donald Trump became president. So Americans tend to describe the world in simplistic ways, right? The Soviet Union is all about socialism and big state power. Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire. Not as an actor with which we can do business, that we need to negotiate with, the way Morgenthau would describe a wise foreign policy. Hans Morgenthau would describe a wise, or this Kissinger would describe a wise foreign policy. No, the USSR is evil. The USSR is like Sauron's Mordor and Lord of the Rings. You can't negotiate with Mordor and Sauron. And then after the Cold War was over, those actors that opposed US after it defeated the evil empire were rogue states. North Korea, Slobodan Milosevic's Serbia, Saddam Hussein's Iraq, Fidel Castro's Cuba, rogue states. Clearly, the United States is a benign hegemon. And anybody who refused to acknowledge the benign hegemony of the United States that saved the world from the evil empire is a rogue, minor actor who is threatened by democracy and freedom. George Bush described them all as the axis of evil: Iran, Iraq, Syria, North Korea. The Axis were the powers that fought World War II, Italy under fascism and Hitler, Germany under Hitler, and the Japanese imperialists. They're the Axis powers, right? And the evil empire. Combine the two, the Axis with the evil empire, the axis of evil. Woo-hoo! So, U.S. should be an example for the world, and the U.S. should be a leader in the world to vindicate its victory in the Cold War by spreading democracy through force if necessary. So the U.S. has a crusading spirit. Donald Trump is challenging this, but replacing it with what? I'm afraid is more going to be just outright American domination if he gets reelected. If Biden is elected president, we'll go back to this. We saw under Obama. Okay, any questions? Okay, if no questions, please send me your paragraphs by Wednesday, okay? Annyeonghi haseyo.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.